Welcome back to Topic 6 for Algebra 1, Solve Problems Using Percentages. In this video, I'm going to show you two different ways that you can solve problems using percentages, percent equation and percent proportion. Let's start off with percent equation. Percent equation is dealing with decoding this original phrase that we're given to figure out what do these words actually mean in terms of math language. So if we have x percent of a number is y. X percent stands for the decimal percent. This number may be written as a decimal or it may look as a whole number. So we ultimately will need to convert it. Of stands for multiplication. A number refers to the whole part that we are looking for, or I should say that we are dealing with. Is stands for equals, and y is the part that we're referring to. So again, x percent of a number is y. The decimal percent times the whole equals the part. So let's first practice with converting some percentages to decimals. Here, this is where I really want you to channel your inner Beyonce. So we have 25%. Whenever you don't see a decimal in the problem, there automatically is a decimal at the end of the number. So this 25, for instance, has a decimal right at the end. Now, in order to convert this percent to just a plain old decimal, we need to move this to the left 2 times. So as a decimal, this turns to 0.25 or 25 hundredths. Now, I'm going to say it both ways just to reinforce the vocabulary that we use in algebra, because this can really help students see the connection in between percentages and decimals. 3%, we have a decimal at the end here. So again, we need to move to the left, and wherever we see an empty space, we're going to fill that in with a 0. So as a decimal, this is really 0.03 or 3 hundredths, because this 3 is in the hundredths spot, and that's hundredths with a TH at the end. Oops. Last but not least, we have 0.06%. So notice here we already have a decimal, so we don't need to draw one in, but we're still going to move that decimal to the left 2 spaces and fill in those empty spaces with zeros. So this is going to give us 0.0006, or this is really 6 10,000ths. Now, if we want to deal with these in fraction form, because we just dealt with proportions in topic 5, a percent means out of 100. And we can actually look at this right here, the percent symbol. We have a 0, a 1, and a 0. So it's just like the 100 number, but just kind of scrambled around a little bit. Remember back to when I was saying 25 hundredths for the first example. That's because as a fraction, we can rewrite this as 25 over 100. Or for the next example, 3 hundredths is the same thing as 3 over 100. Or lastly, we have 0.06 over 100, which oftentimes we don't see decimals in fractions. So if we look at this 6 is in the 10,000ths place. So this is the same thing as 6 over 10,000. Okay. Now let's deal with some decoding in an example. 5% of 80 is what number? So 5%, we need to convert this to a decimal. So we're going to go to the left. This will give us 0.05. We know of is multiplication. Then we have 80, which is given. Is what number? So let's have that be y. Now here, all we need to do is just multiply the left-hand side to simplify. So I'm going to head to Desmos. 0.05 times 80 equals 4. Perfect. So 4 is y. Moving on to percent proportion. This is where we're dealing with fractions or proportions separated by an equal sign. So I have this set up into two categories. We have the actual numbers that we're dealing with, and then we have the percentages that are referenced in the problem. So I want you to think both of these when we're dealing with fractions. If we think back to early elementary school, we think about this with a part of a whole. A part of a whole. So we're only dealing with a portion of the total. In our example here, we have 5% of 80 is what number? So this is the same example that we dealt with before. We ideally should get the same answer that we did in the previous slide. Now this is, again, 5%. As we learned here, percentage really means out of 100. So our 5 is going to be our part of our percentage, because we'll keep it in the percentage column. And then out of, this is really out of 100. So that is going to be my whole. On the left-hand side, we have 5% of 80 is what number? So this is the little tricky part. We're trying to determine, is the 80 that we see here, is that referring to the part or the whole? Now, if we're taking 5% of 80, say we take 5% of my paycheck out into savings. So 5% of 80. 80 is referring to the total. Hopefully my paycheck is a little bit higher than 80. So that 5% is referring to the part over the whole. The 80 is referring to the whole. We do not know what exactly 5% of 80 is. We don't know what that part is. So here is where we're going to deal with the variable. That's where we're going to put it. Now what we can do is cross multiply. So we have y times 100, or 100y, equals 80 times 5. 100 times y still gives us 100y. 80 times 5 gives us 400. Now, since we want to isolate y, we're going to divide both sides by 100. On the left-hand side, it reduces to just y. And on the right-hand side, 400 divided by 100 is 4, which is the same example, the same answer that we got in the previous example for the percent equation. So right now, you've learned two different methods, percent equation and percent proportion. We're going to try using both in order to make sure that we get the same exact answer in our final problem. So here we have 75 is 62.5% of what number? So if we start out with our percent equation, we know 75 stands for equals 62.5%. So here we see a decimal, we're going to move it over 1, 2. So 0.625, or 625 thousandths, of stands for multiplication. What number? We don't know what that number is, so we can put a variable in its place. Here, all we have is a one-step equation. So we're going to divide, using the inverse of multiplication, both sides by 0.625. On the right-hand side, we'll just be left with x. And on the left-hand side, we have 75 divided by 0.625, or 625 thousandths. I'm going to head over to Desmos just to simplify this. So we have 75 divided by 0.625, which gives us 120. So that is our value of x. Let's see if we get that same answer using the percent proportion method. So again, this is dealing with part over whole. Oops. So if we keep our percentages on the right-hand side and our actual numbers on the left-hand side, 75 is 62.5% of what number? Now this 62.5%, we already know that percentage is out of 100. We don't need to convert anything because we know that our denominator, our whole, is going to be 100. And 62.5 is our part. Now again, 75 is 62.5% of a number. If we're saying 75 is 62.5%, that means 75 is not the total, but it's only a portion of our whole value. So 75 here is referring to the part. Our whole is going to be our variable x. Now we can cross multiply. So we have 75 times 100 equals 62.5 times x. Now we're going to simplify the left-hand side. 75 times 100 gives us 7,500 equals 62.5x. This is really 62.5 times x. So we're going to come in with the inverse, which is division. So divide both sides by 62.5. And we'll just be left with x on the right-hand side. On the left-hand side, I'm going to head over to Desmos. 7,500 divided by 62.5 gives us 120. So yay, it matches. And there we have it. So 75 is 62.5% of what? It is 62.5% of 120. Thank you for watching Topic 6 for Algebra 1, Solving Problems Using Proportions.